Hi, this is Pod Save the UK.
I'm Nish Kumar.
And I'm Coco Khan.
This week, the headlines are saying the UK is out of recession. But what does this actually mean?
And we're joined by activist and author George Monbiot to chat about recapturing our democracy. Hi, Nish. How's your week been?
Pretty good, Coco. How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. On your recommendation, I have watched The Wire.
The whole thing?
Well, I'm only like midway through season 1. They're quite long episodes,
great.
okay?
Yeah, they're long episodes. No, I was actually expressing total surprise that you'd watched, I think, 50 hours of television in a week. I was about to say, that's phenomenal going.
That would be my way of telling you that I've lost all my other employment and actually that's a cry for help. Was it your recommendation or was it Susan Hall's recommendation?
Well, it was Susan Hall's recommendation based on not having seen The Wire and just mentioning it, just giving some free publicity for HBO by showing that she has absolutely no knowledge of what happens in the television programme.
And she inspired me to go and watch some. I don't often take my TV recommendations from conservative politicians.
Yeah.
But as you know, my most conservative show that I watch is Homeland.
Right, sure, yeah.
So that is what? What's your favourite right-wing TV show?
Well, I like a lot of action films.
Right, okay.
So, there are arguments that you can make that something like The Enemy of the State or the Bourne films have a left or left of centre ideology, but I think a lot of action films are intrinsically quite right-wing.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I've seen Independence Day.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, Independence Day is borderline propaganda for the military-industrial complex. But fun movie.
A great movie.
When the alien comes out of the ship and he says, "Welcome to Earth," and punches it in the face. That's funny. That's a funny bit.
That is a funny bit. That is a really funny bit. Bridgerton, have you watched it?
No.
Right.
Why?
I haven't watched it either, but I'm told that when this episode drops, the new season will be out. And so some of my friends have been pushing that you and I watch it so that we can talk about it on this show.
Talk about Bridgerton.
Yeah.
Does it have a UK political news bent?
I don't.
All I know about Bridgerton is my girlfriend repeatedly just says, "Look how high their boobs are," when she's watching it. That's all she talks about. All she talks about is how high the boobs of the ladies are.
I mean, it is impressive, isn't it? There must be some machinery, some scaffolding going on there. We respect it.
Speaking of things going up, the UK economy is going upwards. It's growing again, which means that we are officially out of recession. And you can really feel it in the air. You can really feel being out of recession in the air.
I feel buoyant. Do you feel buoyant?
Always.
Just a quick reminder for anyone that doesn't have their ear finely attuned to financial lingo. Our economy is classed as being in recession when we have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth.
Yes. So the Bank of England announced last Friday that the economy's GDP grew by a humongous, astronomical 0.6%. And here is Chancellor Jeremy Hunt trying to take a positive spin on that incredibly large number on BBC Radio 4's Today programme.
You're not calling it strong, are you? That's not what it is. The economy's barely grown for 2 years.
Well, over the last quarter, it's been the joint highest growth in the G7. But of course, when you are tackling inflation at 11%, the Bank of England rightly has to put up interest rates. The government has to take difficult decisions like not caving into public sector pay strikes, which would further fuel inflation. Hard as we know public sector workers are working, it would be the wrong thing for the long term of the economy.
In an analysis piece for The Guardian, Larry Elliott points out that adjusted for our rising population per capita, growth has actually fallen by 1.2% over the duration of the current parliament, meaning this is on course to be the first parliament in living memory to have seen a fall in living standards over the term.
We also need here to discuss someone with a very depressing sounding job title. Michael Fakhri is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food. Due to the increasing levels of poverty and food bank use, he requested to make a special visit to the UK. That request was made back in August 2022, and so far the government has stopped it from happening, saying it would not be feasible this year and meaning it won't happen during the current parliamentary term. 85 groups, including Amnesty International and the Food Foundation, have signed an open letter calling for a reversal of that decision. If you're refusing an invitation from a rapporteur on food bank usage, that suggests you have a sense of what the results are. In last week's episode, we had a great discussion with Aisling B about food poverty, and we highlighted the fact that in January of this year, 8 million adults in the UK experienced food insecurity. And that's in the same time frame that the UK is said to have experienced this unbelievable period of 0.6% economic growth. Also, it really annoys me when they brag about growth statistics, because growth is a measure of how far an economy has grown. So essentially, if you start from a terrible position, of course you're one of the fastest growing economies in the G7. That's not actually a measure of success. It's actually a measure of responding to a catastrophic failure, in this case, the brief prime ministership of Liz Truss.
Right,
and
exactly.
14 years of Conservative rule.
Yeah, it does feel like a level of kind of political gaslighting, doesn't it? For people to keep saying it's fine, everything's on fire, the potholes are there, the NHS is bust, don't go swimming in the lakes, your food is too high or electricity is too high. It's just, it's shameless really for them to get up and say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you use that term because it's the exact term Rachel Reeves used this week, economic gaslighting of the population.
Very unusual for me and Rachel Reeves to say exactly the same thing. Don't know how I feel about it, but okay. And
a former guest on this show, Rachel Erica from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, said this week that politicians and policymakers who gauge economic well-being solely by GDP are like doctors relying solely on a thermometer for diagnosis. People's bills don't suddenly come down or their incomes suddenly rise with a single quarter of slightly stronger than expected GDP growth.
The one small silver lining would be that, this additional bit of money means that hopefully Labour will be able to commit to some public spending, because they're constantly saying we can't commit to that, we don't know what resources we're going to have. Perhaps that means that actually we might start to see from them some promises of something to be hopeful about over the next 5 years.
Yeah. In the meantime, the Conservative Party look deluded as hell.
Consider this your exciting reminder. Pod Save the UK is going on the road.
That's right. I'm going to be at the Edinburgh Fringe the whole month doing a comedy show. And then for 2 very special nights, Coco is going to join me and we're going to do 2 live editions of this show.
So come and see us at the Monkey Barrel on Tuesday the 6th and Wednesday the 7th of August. Tickets are on sale now. Grab them while they're hot and you can find the link in our show notes. Joining us in the studio now is journalist, author and activist George Monbiot. Welcome.
Thank you.
So how was the train today, George?
Oh, God. Freight train broke down. Britain broke down on the way. The whole United Kingdom just ground to a halt as per.
As per usual. No, it was quite funny when you came in. You were like, what a great way to kick off a chat about neoliberalism with a broken down train that you probably paid a lot of money for your ticket.
No, it's perfect. I mean, it's perfect. It's like every single thing they said that privatisation was going to deliver, the opposite happened.
To you today.
Exactly, to me today, and on every previous and subsequent day. It's like it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be more efficient, there's going to be more space, there's going to be more trains running, there'll be an incentive to renew the rolling stock every year, and it's like every promise just go.
I can't drive, and my job requires me to sort of travel around the United Kingdom. So I have spent a lot of time on a lot of trains and sort of watched the kind of continued descent of it. And there are some points where it's like an out-of-body experience. You go, there is no other circumstance in my life where I'd pay £100 to stand next to a toilet. There is just no other circumstance where that would happen. I've got amazing pictures of my friends and I coming back from a wedding in the southwest, and there had been some sort of problem, so the train was overfull, as they always are, and we had reserved seats, but that had all got out. There's just a point where the train driver will declare it's basically the purge. Okay, there's the laws of civil decency have all gone, and we're all sat in the toilet, basically.
Oh, no.
Because there was no room in the kind of vestibule area around the toilet. So we were all stood in the toilet. And then we would literally have to leave the toilet so that someone could piss or shit. It was horrendous.
And then go back in the aroma
the shit
of
fog.
Oh, God.
So when all this kicked off, we started reaching for metaphors. This is like this, or they're like that. It becomes its own metaphor.
Yes.
It's like the rivers are full of shit. That is, you can't make a metaphor for that. It is the metaphor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, metaphor writers are running out of rhyme.
Yeah. So, George, I do want to talk to you about your book, of course, but just quickly, obviously you are one of the foremost environmental voices in the UK. You've been writing about these issues for a long time, and you never shy away from turning the lens to yourself. So over the years, you have ditched your wood-burning stove. You are now a vegan, except for roadkill. Previously, you caught your own fish, although no longer. What's your latest green revelation?
Well, I'm prepared to accept that everything I've ever done is wrong and everything I've ever said is wrong. That's usually a pretty good starting point. So it's yet to be revealed to me, but it's going to come. It's going to come. I suddenly find that bicycles are actually the greatest threat to life.
Are you doing the passive house thing?
Yeah, well, almost. So it's interesting.
What's the passive house thing? I don't know what that is.
So a passive house is a house where
it does sound like a German electronic genre, doesn't it? Oh yeah, I'm doing the passive house.
Yeah, actually, it is a German electronic genre. It genuinely is. It's a German idea. It was a passive house originally, and it's a house which basically runs on electricity alone. So it's exactly what you say.
Oh, right.
But it requires no heating. It requires no heating. So a fully passive house, you don't have any heating source at all except your own bodies.
Wow.
That's all it takes. Now, we're renting an almost passive house where when it gets at its coldest in the winter, you might need to turn on one electric radiator in the house, but that is it.
Wow.
Really?
It's not quite a passive house, but it's very close. In a true passive house, you just invite some friends round if it gets cold.
Really?
And that's all it takes, and it gets up to 19
But how does
degrees.
it work? Is that just through insulation?
It's so well insulated,
Right,
and the
okay.
windows are so good, and you've got this heat recovery system so that is well ventilated, but the ventilation system captures the heat as the air goes out of the house,
Right.
and uses it to warm the air coming back into the house.
Environmentalism is obviously a big theme of your work, and there's critiques of how corporations have shifted the blame onto individuals and attempts to rethink how we think about corporate power. And it feels like, having read this book, The Invisible Doctrine, The Secret History of Neoliberalism, which you've written with Peter Hutchinson, it feels like this is the kind of unification of a lot of what you've been writing about, really for your whole career, really. Like, this feels like you've everything has coalesced around a single idea. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, I started off as a nature nut. I just love the outdoors and I love nature and I know a lot about it, and I just wanted to protect the living world. And as I began bumping into the constraints, I realised, well, that's never enough. You have to understand why it's being screwed in the first place. You have to understand what the political forces are, what the economic forces are. And I gradually began to realise that we have the worst possible dominant ideology at the worst possible time. Because what neoliberalism says is we've got to strip away all the barriers to rich people making themselves richer. Get rid of the tax and the redistribution. Get rid of well-funded public services. Get rid of economic safety nets. Get rid of the regulations that protect workers, that protect consumers, and above all, that protect the natural world. So the sort of the godfather of neoliberalism was this guy called Friedrich Hayek, this economist, who wrote one relatively sane but completely wrong book called The Road to Serfdom, and one absolutely off-the-wall bonkers book called The Constitution of Liberty, because by then he'd been massively funded by some of the richest people on earth, and he just wanted to give them exactly what they wanted to hear. Wow. And one of the things he said in that, among many other really, really crazy things, was there should be no environmental protections at all. We should see any environmental resource like any other resource which we exploit to exhaustion, make as much money from, and then move on. And this was the book which, according to members of her shadow cabinet in 1975, soon after she became leader of the opposition in this country, Mrs. Thatcher walked in on a meeting of her shadow cabinet, and they were already sitting down and discussing, so, well, what do we really believe? What is the core principles of the Conservative Party at this moment? And the story goes,
That's a damn good impression of a 70s Conservative. That's bang on. And we can add impressionists to your list of skills, George.
So she snaps open her handbag and she pulls out this totally ragged, dog-eared book, clearly read 100 times, and slams it on the table and says, "This is what we believe." Wow. And this was the Constitution of Liberty. this completely insane book by Friedrich Hayek.
It's so fascinating because people on the left are often described as ideologues, that we're obsessed with theory. But actually, what is more ideological than that moment you described there?
Yeah. No, it's really, and it's not just that, it's actually Calvinist. This is a very Calvinist religious doctrine.
Can you just explain what you mean by that?
So Calvinism says, there are the worthy and there are the unworthy. There are those who have been lit by the grace of God and those who have no grace. And God pours his mercy and his grace upon the deserving who will go to heaven and the rest will go to hell, literally and metaphorically. Well, this is exactly what neoliberalism says, but God is the invisible hand. And the invisible hand of this thing they call the market, which is a euphemism for economic power, which is a euphemism for rich people. The invisible hand will bestow its grace upon the deserving and withhold its grace from the undeserving. So if you tax the rich and if you redistribute their wealth and if you create strong public services to help people who are not rich and if you create an economic safety net, a welfare state to help people who are not rich, and if you allow trade unions to operate and protesters to operate or even effective politics to operate, then you are interfering in that natural order and you will therefore make your society weaker and you will destroy its enterprising spirit.
We see that rhetoric all the time, even today.
Yeah.
Hunt and Mel Stride were talking about, I can't remember what language they used, the skivers, shirkers, something like that. It's all that moralistic language around, people who don't have money are somehow unethical, impure, wrong, lazy, feckless. You can see it.
And the worst thing of it is that because this doctrine has been universalized, it's become so deeply impressed into our lives, we start to internalize that, and the rich believe they're responsible for their own good fortune, forget the advantages of their inheritance, their schooling, their background, their skin colour, all the other things which give them a massive head start. They are solely responsible for being so rich. And the poor come to believe that they're responsible for being so poor. Everyone internalizes this poisonous doctrine which says you are where you are because you deserve it.
But that's an important part of why you've written the book and why neoliberalism, the word, is actually in the kind of title of the book, isn't it? Because what you're describing and what's described in the book is a doctrine, but the problem is that it's not perceived as being a doctrine. It's not perceived as being a school of thought. It is simply, we have to swallow it as economic fact.
Yeah, this is the way things are. This is how their greatest success has been to claim that this really bonkers ideology is just the way things are. It's just the natural order. It's like a natural law, like natural selection or like gravity. It's just the way things are, and there is no alternative. This is what, as Thatcher kept saying, so often that it was actually reduced to its acronym TINA. Yeah. There is no alternative. There's no other way that this can be, which was really weird for a doctrine which is supposed to be about choice.
But talk to us about the bonkers nature of the ideology. What are the elements of it that you find most bonkers?
Yeah, it's this belief that to be rich is to be worthy. And in the Constitution of Liberty in particular, Hayek describes people who are like Trump. He says, however grotesque their behaviour is, that is pioneering behaviour which lights a path for society. And in fact, the more grotesque it is and the more outrageous and disgusting their behaviour is, the better that will be for everyone, because there'll be a sort of moral trickle-down effect. And they light the path to social and cultural change, which is kind of true. I mean, they do, but whoever thinks that's a good thing needs their head examined. I mean, it's really...
Yeah, it's like people who describe themselves as disruptors. You go, that disruption is not inherently useful. It depends what the disruption is. Standing up in the middle of a church service and screaming the F word is a disruption.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily welcomed by the congregation, but it's still a disruption. Yeah. But then one of the most sort of powerful elements about this ideology is that because it was accepted as economic fact that the best way to run our economies was low tax, low regulation economies, that pill was then swallowed by centre-left parties, the Blairite government, Clinton's government in America. Where do you see us in terms of the current Labour Party? Because obviously we're talking about the Labour Party I think with good reason, as being the next government.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of rhetoric coming out of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves that they will not be turning the spending tabs on. Are we in danger of making the same mistake again?
Well, this is the amazing thing about it. I mean, because neoliberalism collapsed spectacularly in 2008. You know, the financial crisis was a direct result of the deregulation of the financial sector, which was exactly what they had been demanding all the way along. And it collapsed financially, morally, intellectually, all the rest of it. But it just keeps trundling on. This zombie doctrine just keeps walking. So then Liz Truss comes along and says, right, we're going to take it to the limit. She was like the most purely neoliberal prime minister we've ever had. She was going to do it by the book because here's what the theory says. So how could it possibly fail? And she surrounded herself by these utter creeps from the dark money junk tanks, the Institute of Economic Affairs and the Centre for Policy Studies and the Policy Exchange and all these creepy, sinister people who refuse to reveal who funds them. And she allowed them to basically write her policies for her, to engineer this policy platform of hers. And we all saw the results. And yet still it walks, and it walks in the trousers of the Labour Party now. Yeah. This is the extraordinary thing. You know, if you listen to Rachel Reeves's mice lecture, for example, or seen her comments, as you say, about spending, you know, this renewed commitment to austerity, to continuing to deregulate corporations, this is pure neoliberalism. And it has failed again and again and again. How many more times does it need to fail before people see that it's just going to lead us towards disaster? So it's actually profoundly depressing to see Starmer and Reeves committed to an idea which is completely bankrupt in every respect. It does us no good. Ultimately, it'll do them no good. But the fundamental problem we face is that we have not produced a new story with which to replace it.
I think one of the most troubling examples of what you're talking about here in terms of the Labour Party, and also going back to your journey and your core love of the earth, is the Green Investment Pledge, right? So they've rolled back on their original pledge of 28 billion. They've halved their commitment to being just under 15 billion pounds. I'm actually going to play you a clip. So here's Keir Starmer announcing the changes earlier this year.
What won't now happen is that we won't make further or new investment decisions, and that means that we won't reach the £28 billion envisaged, and that figure is effectively stood down. The reason for that is because since we announced the 28 billion, the Tories have done terrible damage to our economy, not just the Liz Truss budget, but also now the government briefing that it's going to max out on the government credit card. Reckless, but I have to anticipate the circumstances as they are now, not as I'd wish them to be.
I saw you shaking your head in dismay hearing that.
Well, look, in fairness to him, it would be totally disorienting if we were to have a politician who kept their promises and didn't blame the other side for their own failings. It would just blow our minds. We wouldn't know how to cope. So, he's trying to keep us in our safe space here. But
there's a reason we don't have more politicians do what you did by opening the interview by saying maybe everything I think is wrong.
That's right. But this whole thing that it's a credit card which you can max out. So
oh my God.
That just shows a complete fundamental misunderstanding of the state budget.
Please talk us through, because this is one of the core tenets of my anger.
Yeah.
And it's that 2008 happens. It's a crisis of neoliberalism. It's a crisis of economic deregulation. The book goes into it in great detail. Then in this country, we treat it with austerity, which is in effect treating a disease with more of the disease.
It's bloodletting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Bloodletting.
And then talk us through this idea of the national credit card, because we hear it all the time. We hear about the national, there's no magic money tree. The public finances is like a household. We've maxed out the national credit card. Just explain to us why that is horseshit.
Sure. Because if you spend money into public services, you stimulate economic growth. It's simple as that. Now, as it happens, I'm very sceptical about economic growth because of its environmental impacts. But, if you wanted to do what he claims to be doing, you would actually spend more money You would stimulate more economic activity by investing in public services, by investing in the Green New Deal, etc., etc. That would have the exact opposite effect of what he says it would have. You don't run out of money there, you create money by that means, because a state is not the same as a household. They're totally different entities and they run on completely different principles.
I can't print my own money. Not yet.
Coming soon, Cocoa Bucks.
Exactly.
I was talking to a young person last week who was saying that they were at school in the 2010s and were doing A-levels in 2012, and their economics teacher actually said to them, I don't know how to teach you economics at the moment because the things that the Chancellor is doing, I would fail you if you proposed that.
Wow.
He said, if an A-level student came to me and said, we are going to cut our way out of a recession, I would say, you have not understood.
Exactly.
You've not understood economics.
Exactly. I'm going to cut my way out of this broken bone. It's so bizarre, isn't it? But, of course, what the Tories wanted, they wanted to destroy public services, because that's neoliberal ideology. You've got to destroy the public services. They wanted to cut tax for the rich, etc., etc. The question is, why does Labour want the same thing?
One more thing I want to talk to you about as well, really stood out to me just on a personal level in your book and also some of your recent writing, is the relationship between neoliberalism and mental well-being. This idea that you are to blame, your poverty, your poor health, you're just lazy, you're feckless. If only you spent more on beauty if you're a woman. If only you exercised harder and got up at 5 a.m. and did some squats, you'd be a better person. I just wonder if you could elaborate on that for our listeners.
So, it's an extraordinary thing, and it was even more extraordinary that it was scarcely reported at all here in the UK, but there was a recent global survey of 71 nations on mental well-being, and we came worst for mental distress out of 71 nations, equal worst with South Africa. In overall mental ill health, we were second from worst. We beat Uzbekistan just. Out of 71 nations. And
suck it, Uzbekistan.
Yeah, exactly. So, what's going on here? Well, we've been turned into neoliberal citizens more effectively than in almost any other country because we've had 45 years of it uninterrupted, and people say, oh, but we had a Labour government. You say, yeah, there was some small amelioration of certain aspects, but they were, fundamentalist neoliberals in other respects. The private finance initiative, which we're still suffering from, our schools and hospitals and stuff, prisons and the rest of it are still basically bankrupt because of the private finance initiative. And all these crazy other neoliberal things which Labour did. And it whittles away at your mind. This blame, this endless blame, which is at the heart of neoliberalism, is all your fault. Well, however huge and structural the issue might be, structural unemployment, it's your fault for being unenterprising. Obesity, nothing to do with the junk food industry, nothing to do with the fact that they've turned all the playing fields into development. It's your fault for being lazy. Everything always is your fault. And even when
Climate change. Climate change is our fault. It's not corporations' fault.
And we have to solve it individually because what neoliberalism tells us is we're not citizens, we're consumers. And, this is a deliberate strategy because, if we're citizens, we're effective. When Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society, that was not a statement of fact, it was a manifesto. That's what she wanted it to be. Because when you get together as a society, when you act as politically engaged citizens, you're threatening to power. But as consumers, sitting at home choosing a different brand of biscuits online, you've got no power at all. You're absolutely zero. You're just a different kind of consumer. You might be, I'm a green consumer. Fine. What does that change? It actually changes nothing. It has no structural impact at all. What it changes is to isolate you. Is to make you alone, is to destroy your role as a member of civic society, as a democratically engaged citizen. And that is devastating.
Yeah, I want to talk about something you mentioned there, which is about us all being politically engaged. And we want to also bring some hope to the conversation as well. And one of the things that you've been an advocate for is different methods to re-energize voters. In the book, because one of the things we should stress about the book is you do try and proffer an alternative story to fill in how we might reimagine the country and the systems by which we're governed. And you talk a lot about, local organisation and local political action, but also coupling that with democratic action in a big P political sense. One of the things that you've been doing, and we actually talked about it on the show a couple of months ago, is the People's Primary in South Devon. So can you talk to us about what that's about?
Yeah, sure. So this is basically wresting political power out of the hands of political parties and bringing it back to the people. It wasn't my idea, but I'm a supporter of it. A brilliant small local group of people who said, we're just going to sit here and watch the Tory win again. And we're going to sit and watch the Tory win because the vote is going to be split between the progressive parties, or the more progressive parties. And they're going to bicker among each other and each try to maximise their vote. And the way the polls are looking, Lib Dems are going to get 31%, Labour's going to get 31%, the Tories are going to get 34%, and the Tories are going to get in again.
Yeah.
So classic progressive tragedy, as Neil Lawson calls it. And so what are we going to do about this? Well, we're going to basically push the political parties out of the way and say we're going to decide who our candidate is going to be. So we'll invite them, they can come and talk to us at public meetings and say why they should be the one we should all get behind. But it's not them who are going to make that decision. We, as the local people, are going to make this decision. And so we had a series of 8 meetings around the constituency. Labour had still failed to field a candidate, unbelievably. I mean, they're just in total disarray. It's really depressing. You think, they're preparing for government. Actually, they're not preparing to tie their own shoelaces. It's rubbish. And so it was the Greens and the Lib Dems. The Lib Dem headquarters saw the threat that this posed to their control and tried to shut the whole thing down. But thank goodness the local candidate, who's very strong-minded, told them to F off and just went ahead with it. And we had these 8 really amazing meetings, fully attended, packed out, where people asked just really sensible questions. What you find is that when you give people more democratic opportunities, they become more democratic citizens. It's a sort of self-improving system. And we came out with a clear result that the most likely to win the election was going to be the Lib Dem candidate. And so we decided, regardless of all prior political affiliations, that's the one we're going to get behind in order to get rid of the Tory, who's completely useless anyway. And so it's a way. I mean, it's by no means a fix to all our political dysfunctions, but it's one small way in which you can start to sort of reclaim politics from the centralised system which has been built around it. But we need to go much, much further than this. I mean, we've got a really crazy system. It's basically an 18th century system with a little veneer of democracy on top of it. I mean, you can see this just in the bloody symbol they use. What is the symbol of Parliament, right? There's a crown with a portcullis and chains. So centralised power, exclusion and captivity. When a system tells you what it is, believe it. So, and it's this crazy thing where, they say, right, the way the system works, right, is that these parties will vie for power at a general election, and they'll each publish a manifesto with hundreds of proposals in it, and no one will read the manifesto, but you'll all vote on 1 or 2 issues, or maybe not even an issue at all. It might even be a 3-word slogan. Get Brexit done. People will just vote on whether they like that or don't like that. And then a party will get in with a minority of the total vote and will assume a mandate to do whatever it wants to do for the next 5 years, because people have got behind us. So we presume consent for everything that's in the manifesto and everything that's not in the manifesto that we want to do. We don't accept the principle of presumed consent in sex. Why should we accept it in politics? Now, there's all sorts of things we accept in politics we don't accept in any other sphere, like coercive and controlling behaviour, for example. So why the hell are we putting up with this in the 21st century? There are amazing tools now for creating genuine participatory, deliberative democracy. But what you find in all these situations is that, bizarrely, it works much better in practice than it does in theory. And the reason for that is this transformation of people into democratic citizens. People say, ordinary people could never make rational decisions, unlike the professional politicians. And what you find is that ordinary people make far more rational decisions than the buffoons that we have in Westminster. Ordinary people will always just argue with each other and, pursue their own self-interest. No, that actually describes the people that we've put in as MPs in our so-called representative democracy. It does not describe the way that most people are. In fact, you could see society as a society of altruists governed by psychopaths.
Another great band name. Governed by psychopaths.
Altruist governed by psychopaths is a fantastic... it's both a fantastic band name and an amazing way to...
There are copyright lawyers filing papers as we speak.
It's a fantastic band name, and it's a fantastic way to round off this conversation. George, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Total pleasure.
It was such a pleasure to have. The book is called The Invisible Doctrine, and it is available now, and I strongly recommend it. Now, we had so much fun with our souffle of villains last week that we're whipping up another serving right now. So in a week where, with the defection of Natalie Elphicke to the Labour Party, we've been questioning Labour's values and worrying about a drift to the right more than ever, the Conservatives have clearly seen this and felt insecure, so have decided that no one lurches to the right harder than the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom. So they wheeled out the Minister for Common Sense, and I'm using the largest inverted commas possible for that, Esther McVey, who's announced a crackdown on the most dreadful example of civil service impropriety, the rainbow lanyard. Listen to this clip from LBC.
You don't need political activism in a visible way. Because for every lanyard that you show, you're therefore not saying about all the other things you do or don't agree with. So you're promoting one at the exclusion of other things you're making. And hence I asked the question, why would you be wearing it? It is making a statement. You're putting it on to make a statement.
So what she's saying is that civil servants shouldn't wear rainbow lanyards. Why stop there, Esther McVey? Why not legally ban Skittles from the civil service? Why not announce the Ministry of Defence is going to bomb the sky next time that there's a rainbow for promoting the homosexual agenda? But not only is this utter horseshit that's just throwing red meat to the base, it's also absolutely meaningless, right? Because after McVey said all of this stuff, the Downing Street spokesperson said the guidance was not going to be prescriptive and said it was an illustrative example and said that the speech was bringing to life the issues she's been working on. So it's not even coming into force as a rule. It's just homophobia for homophobia's sake. That's all it is. And, it is astonishing the level of stupidity and the depths of sheer idiocy that this government is capable of sinking to. I would say a broader common sense suggestion, if you're really interested in common sense, is why don't you all just fuck off? Why don't you all just fuck off and wind the Conservative Party up as a political entity? Because at this point, it's serving nothing of any use to people living in this country. All it's trying to do is sow harmony and division. So there's my Minister for Common Sense suggestion. Go fuck yourself.
I couldn't agree more. So listen, even though we need him to disappear, we do want to talk about everyone's favourite, and by that I mean notorious, SPAD-turned-substacker Dominic Cummings. He is trying another tilt at power through the form of a new political party with a working title of the Startup Party, although whispers suggest he's actually going to go with the name People's Action, which is maybe just bland enough to trick unsuspecting voters, although it does have a touch of the, jackboot about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, People's Action is, work makes freedom. Yeah, it's all a little... a little work makes freedom.
Well, you did say about voting accidentally for the racist party, so keep an eye out, People's Action. Politico is reporting that Cummings has been holding a series of focus groups to get the public's view on a new anti-establishment party. I'm doing air quotes for anti-establishment there. And in his first interview since leaving Number 10, he told the iNewspaper last week that the Startup Party would be completely different, ruthlessly focused on voters, and friendly to all the amazing talent in the country. On his blog announcing the Startup Party in August last year, Cummings said that it would take Britain out of the European Convention on Human Rights and he would massively cut the civil service, and that the goal is to win in 2028, govern for 2 terms and self-destruct as a legal entity. It's a bit like the sort of Hinge, designed to be deleted, the Startup Party. He goes on to say that
it's a dating app, but everybody's got STDs. That's basically what it is.
He goes on to say that the Startup Party should immediately, after the exit polls are live on election night 2024, have a plan to divert energy and money away from how to revive the Tories and instead be how to replace the Tories. So, what do you think? Just another populist party?
Well, the only thing Dominic Cummings and I are in agreement in is that the Conservative Party should be wound up as a political entity. That's pretty much the only thing we have in common at this point. I think any political party that is fronted by Dominic Cummings is going to have a serious credibility issue.
Yes.
I don't think...
You could say it's a bit short-sighted.
There you go.
That's why we do this job. It's for puns like that.
I think that people like Cummings and Johnson have badly underestimated the extent to which the breaches of lockdown have angered the majority of people, regardless of their voting intention in this country. I don't see either of those men being forgiven anytime soon by most of the people in this country. And also, I think there's a serious credibility gap from the man who gave us I drove to Barnard Castle to test my eyesight. I just think that feels like the sort of thing. And a political operative who has a history of reading the public mood that Dominic Cummings does undeniably have should probably be able to work that out. If he thinks that the public is going to take him seriously, it's not just his eyes he needs to get tested.
I do wonder if he actually is doing this for the public. I think, or is it his own revenge that he wants to take on the Conservative Party?
Yeah, and it's probably a preview of the next couple of years of the immediate future of the Conservative Party, which is sort of internecine squabbling between various different factions. There are a kind of group of One Nation or centrist Conservatives that are trying to rally behind Andy Street, who was actually just defeated as the Mayor of the West Midlands. They're trying to unite behind him to try and persuade him to run first as an MP and then potentially for leader of the Conservative Party on a more centrist platform. There's obviously the whispers about Penny Mordaunt from that same wing of the party. Then obviously there's Suella Braverman on the kind of hard right of the party. Then there's Lee Anderson and Reform UK that is trying to drag the entire conversation further to the right. And then there's sort of everyone's favourite kind of state smasher brackets, incredibly tedious bore Dominic Cummings. So there's sort of various factions vying for the centre-right, right and far right of the British political spectrum over the next few years.
But I think the only thing I would add is when you were saying earlier about they underestimate that the public won't forgive this charlatanism that was at the heart of the Johnson government and that Cummings was part of. I completely agree. I mean, you just look at the Liberal Democrats and they still struggle because there's a generation of people who will never forget what Nick Clegg did. The public are very forgiving, but we do keep receipts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also, that's 10 years ago.
Yeah,
This is much more recent history.
That's what I mean. What are they playing at? So now listen, some of you have noticed that we've had some heroes missing lately. And, we want to mix it up. Something hugely important to us on this podcast, which we hope you know, is that we want to celebrate the people making change. And we also want to hear about the radical ways that's being done. So we do want to bring our heroes back, but we want you to help us. If you know of any grassroots campaigns that you're working on or that you want to give a shout out to, then let us know.
Yes, and we also want to let you know that next week we'll be focusing on the rights and well-being of the trans community. We're going to take another look at the Cass Review with some very special guests. If you have any burning questions that you'd like us to answer or would like to share your own experience, please do get in touch.
You can send those grassroots shout-outs or any other comments you have by emailing psuk@reducedlistening.co.uk. We love hearing your voices, so if you're feeling brave, send us a voice note on WhatsApp. Our number is 07494 933 444. Internationally, that's +44 7494 933 444.
Don't forget to follow @PodSaveTheUK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. You can also find us on YouTube for access to full episodes and other exclusive content. You can drop us a review too if you like, but only if it's positive.
Pod Save the UK is a reduced listening production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to senior producer James Tyndale and digital producer Alex Bishop, with additional production support from Annie Keats-Thorpe.
Video editing was by Will Darkin and the music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos.
Thanks to our engineer, Alex Bennett.
The executive producers are Anishka Sharma, Dan Jackson and Madeline Herringer, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
Remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursday on Amazon, Spotify or Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.